Lunar eclipses explained. Many will point to a lunar eclipse to refute any notion of a flat Earth. The argument being that both the sun and moon could not be smaller lights over a much larger Earth, because an eclipse is argued to be the blocking of the sunlight on the moon by the intervention of a spherical Earth. The problem with that postulation is that it assumes facts that have never been proven. That is, it assumes that a lunar eclipse is caused by the passing of a spherical Earth between a distant sun and the moon. That supposed scientific fact can be proven to be a fallacy. Samuel Rowbotham explains many historical instances where both the sun and moon were visible to an observer above the horizon during an eclipse of the moon. If the eclipse of the moon is caused by the intervention of the supposed shadow of a spherical Earth between the sun and the moon, it would be impossible for an observer on the Earth to see both the sun and the eclipsed moon above the horizon. Rowbotham cites an instance on the 19th of July, 1750, when the moon appeared visibly eclipsed, while the sun was distinctly to be seen above the horizon. He cites another example where on the 20th of April, 1837, the moon appeared to rise eclipsed before the sun had set. The same phenomena was observed on the 20th of September, 1717. Those are not the only instances of this happening. Rowbotham continues. In the lunar eclipses of July 17, 1590, November 3, 1648, June 16, 1666, and May 26, 1668, the moon rose eclipsed while the sun was still apparently above the horizon. Those horizontal eclipses were noticed as early as the time of Pliny. In a later 1881 edition of his book, Rowbotham cites to a Daily Telegraph report of the sun and eclipsed moon simultaneously appearing above the horizon. On the 17th of January 1870, a similar phenomena occurred, and again in July of the same year. One might wonder if that same phenomena is apparent today. In fact, it has been a regular occurrence throughout history. As reported by Joe Ryo for Space.com, on October 8, 2014, interested skywatchers should attempt to see the total eclipse of the moon and the rising sun simultaneously. The little-used name for this effect is called a selenium, a phenomena that celestial geometry says cannot happen. Notice that Ryo explains that the phenomena of the sun and the eclipsed moon appearing above the horizon at the same time is a phenomena that celestial geometry says cannot happen. Indeed, the very phenomena is an impossibility under the heliocentric mythology. Modern scientists have even given a label to this impossibility, a selenium. Of course, modern cosmologists must now define their new dogma in scientific terms so that the masses won't discover that it is really a religious deception. How do they explain this phenomena? Joe Ryo presents this scientific explanation. And indeed, during a lunar eclipse, the sun and moon are exactly 180 degrees apart in the sky. In a perfect alignment like this, called syzygy, such an observation would be impossible, but thanks to Earth's atmosphere, the images of both the sun and moon are apparently lifted above the horizon by atmospheric refraction. This allows people on Earth to see the sun for several extra minutes before it actually has risen, and the moon for several minutes after it has actually set. As a consequence of this atmospheric trick, for many localities east of the Mississippi River, watchers will have a chance to observe this unusual sight firsthand. Weather permitting, you could have a short window of roughly 2 to 9 minutes, depending on your location, with the possibility of simultaneously seeing the sun rising in the east while the eclipsed full moon is setting in the west. Ryo would have the viewers of the phenomena reject what their eyes see and instead believe in his scientific explanation that it is an atmospheric trick. It is like the man caught by his wife in bed with another woman and explaining to his wife that she did not really see what she saw. He argues, "Are you going to believe me or your lying eyes?" In like manner, the hapless eclipse observers must ignore what they see and yield their minds to the heliocentric dogma that they are not really seeing what is plainly before their eyes, the sun and eclipse moon simultaneously above the horizon. The problem with Ryo's explanation is that it cannot explain the observed event. To understand this, we must look at a time-lapse film of a December 2011 daytime lunar eclipse taken from New Mexico. In the time-lapse, the moon is being eclipsed as the sun rises above the horizon. The dark eclipse of the moon does not appear progressing from the bottom of the moon and going up, as expected by scientific explanation of the selenium as being due to atmospheric refraction of light. The moon can be seen being eclipsed by a shadow that traveled over the moon from the top down. The atmospheric refraction explanation of the pseudoscientists of modern heliocentricity requires the shadow to progress from under the moon. What actually happened with the shadow progressing downward refutes the light refraction explanation. Below is a screenshot of a time-lapse video of the December 2011 daytime lunar eclipse taken from Madison, Wisconsin. Next, we see a screenshot of a video taken of the December 2011 lunar eclipse viewed from East St. Louis, Illinois, where the sun and the moon were above the horizon. The sun has risen behind the cameraman, and the eclipse of the moon can clearly be seen with the shadow progressing from top down. That is just the opposite of what would be expected under the atmospheric refraction explanation given by the heliocentric pseudoscientists. Early in the East St. Louis eclipse video, the narrator is standing between the eclipsing moon and the rising sun. He states that behind me is a full moon, which will soon be going into a full lunar eclipse as it sets, kind of a rare experience, while at the same time behind us the sun is already beginning to rise. The narrator then explains the unexpected occurrence of the shadow of the moon coming down across the moon, rather than realize that such an occurrence is impossible if the Earth were a spinning globe in space. He tries to reconcile the impossibility of what he is seeing with his ingrained heliocentric conditioning. Quote, "What I find very interesting is that I was expecting the shadow to come upward across the moon, and actually it is going the other way around. The shadow is creeping down across the moon, even though the sun is coming up over here, and that must be because of the moon's rotation around the Earth. It's moving farther up, even though the sun's light is actually coming from over there. It's actually coming underneath the Earth. The moon must be rotating, and even though we're turning so it looks like the moon is going down, it's kind of an optical illusion. Pretty cool." End of quote. His explanation makes no sense. He unconvincingly states that the light at the bottom of the moon is being caused by the light from the sun bending around the bottom of the Earth and popping up on the other side to light the bottom of the moon. His explanation seems to be a variation on the atmospheric refraction argument, although it violates all known properties of light and refraction. The narrator of the eclipse video explains that the sunrise is scheduled for 7:08 a.m. When 7:08 a.m. arrives, the narrator explains that the sun could be seen peaking above the horizon. He then states that exactly 180 degrees in this direction, and 180 degrees in the other direction is where the moon is. So they're in a perfect line, the moon being this way and the sun being that way. If we drew a line from it, the sun to the earth and to the moon, it would be a nice perfect straight line. Of course, if it wasn't, we wouldn't have a lunar eclipse. End of quote. It is astounding that someone could be standing and looking at the sun above the horizon and in a straight line directly 180 degrees across from him see the eclipsing moon and conclude that the earth he is standing upon is casting a shadow and causing the lunar eclipse. You would think that it would dawn on him that such an occurrence cannot be explained by the heliocentric model. This is a little diagram here. Under the heliocentric model, it is impossible for a daytime lunar eclipse to be caused by the Earth's shadow. The diagram above illustrates the impossibility of the Earth's shadow causing a daytime lunar eclipse. Indeed, the progression of the shadow over the moon from the top down renders preposterous the explanation of heliocentric scientists that the phenomena of selenium, I'm just going to say, keep it at that. A daytime lunar eclipse is due to atmospheric refraction. For the absurd atmospheric refraction theory to have any viability, the shadow would need to travel from the bottom up, not the top down, as actually occurs. I'm going to stop there, and then I will make a part 2 for the rest.